The carpet in this executive wing always felt a little too plush, a little too silent. It used to make me nervous, like walking on a cloud that might give way. But today, it felt like a red carpet rolled out just for me. I stopped right in front of the door. The door, it hadn't changed a bit. Thick, dark walnut, the kind that screams, I make more money than you, and I deserve a better view. I let my fingers brush over the polished brass plaque. Victor Vance, Chief Technology Officer. Funny, I remembered polishing that very plaque with a microfiber cloth on a Saturday morning once, trying to impress him. Now, my name wasn't on this door, but I was about to walk through it and change the name on it permanently. I stood there, honestly, for a solid minute, just breathing in the recycled, air-conditioned executive air. I needed to let the victory settle, to let the years of bitterness and grinding work crystallize into this single, perfect moment. You guys have to understand, this wasn't just about a job title. This wasn't some corporate ladder nonsense. This was about a man who didn't just fire me. He dismantled my entire life and then stood on the wreckage to take a victory lap. And he did it all from behind that door. I looked down at my reflection in the polished marble floor. My suit was custom-made, cut sharp enough to slice glass. My tie wasn't some off-the-rack polyester thing. It was silk, the color of a midnight sky. It was armor, really. The old Howard. The one who wore slightly ill-fitting suits and always looked a little too eager. Wouldn't recognize this guy. That Howard, the one who loved his wife, Sarah, and thought his boss was his mentor, was long gone. He died right around the time I realized the two people I trusted most in the world were starring in their own little daytime soap opera, without telling me. I could hear the dull hum of the server rack somewhere down the hall, the quiet, persistent heartbeat of this whole massive IT operation. It used to be a comforting sound. It meant I had a place here, a purpose. Now it just sounded like a countdown timer. And the clock was hitting 0 for the guy on the other side of that door. Think about the worst betrayal you've ever experienced. Multiply that by 10. Then imagine that person, the one who stabbed you in the back, not only gets away with it, but actively uses his position of power to grind you into the dirt just to make his victory sweeter. That was my life for a whole year. The casual cruelty of it was the worst part. He didn't even try to hide the affair. Once he knew I knew. He flaunted it. He made me the joke. Every lunch break, every water cooler chat, every late-night email suddenly had a subtext only I could read. He's sleeping with your wife, and you can't do a damn thing about it. I closed my eyes for a second, feeling the smooth leather portfolio I was carrying. Inside were the papers that would rewrite Victor Vance's entire future. Years of planning, hundreds of late nights, countless coffees that tasted like regret. It all came down to this. The feeling in my chest wasn't relief. Not exactly. It was a cold, hard sense of inevitability, like watching a perfectly timed domino chain finally reach the last piece. I remember talking to my therapist about it, and she kept saying I needed to find closure, to forgive and move on. Look, I'm not saying she was wrong, but she clearly hadn't met Victor Vance. Forgiveness is for people who accidentally take your parking spot. This guy destroyed my family. Closure was going to be delivered with an iron fist, wrapped in an acquisition deal. Before I go in and make my move, let me ask you guys something. You're watching this. Maybe you're on a bus. Maybe you're stuck at work. Maybe you're just chilling at home. Drop a comment right now and tell me where and when you're watching this video. Seriously, let me know. It's wild to think about my story reaching you wherever you are right now. Okay, focus, Howard. I ran my hand over the knot of my tie one last time. I could hear the faint sound of music coming from inside, some smooth jazz. Victor always had to have his atmosphere, his vibe. It was all part of the act, the polished exterior that hid the swamp of his actual character. He probably thought he was having a normal Tuesday. He probably thought he was untouchable. He probably thought I was still stuck in the data entry basement, feeding spreadsheets into a black hole. He was wrong. So spectacularly, beautifully wrong. I remember the smell of Sarah's perfume mixing with his expensive cologne on the collar of his shirt I thought I just laundered. I remember the way my hands shook when I found the hotel receipt crumpled in her car. I remember the way Victor had smiled at me the next day, a deep, knowing smirk, as he handed me a box of my personal effects and told me I was being reassigned for performance issues. That memory was the fuel that had powered me through every setback, every demoralizing moment of the last 12 months. I didn't knock. Knocking would imply respect, or at least a preamble. This wasn't a social call. This was an executive action. My hand wrapped around the cold brass knob. I felt the satisfying click of the tumblers turning under the pressure of my grip. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a fierce, controlled excitement. The kind of adrenaline rush you get right before you jump out of a plane. Except I wasn't jumping. I was landing, and I was landing right on top of him. I pushed the door open, slow and deliberate. The office was exactly as I remembered it. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. The ridiculously large mahogany desk. The uncomfortable modern art. And there he was, Victor Vance. He was sitting with his back to me, staring out at the view, talking on the phone, his feet up on the edge of the desk. Classic Victor. Arrogant, relaxed, completely unaware. He finally turned, a hand still covering the mouthpiece, ready to give some dismissive wave, probably thinking I was some poor intern. The casual, bored expression on his face started to curdle the moment his eyes registered who was standing in his doorway. He saw the suit. He saw the cold, utterly devoid of recognition look on my face. And then he saw me, Howard, the guy he thought he'd defeated, the guy he thought he'd discarded. The smooth jazz didn't sound so smooth anymore. It sounded like a funeral march. I took one step into the office, the door swinging shut softly behind me, sealing us in this moment. The only sound was a phone muffled against his hand and the sudden, sharp intake of his breath. The game was finally over, and I had won. Victor dropped the phone. It clattered on the mahogany desk, still emitting a faint, tinny voice on the other end, quickly swallowed by the thick silence. His face, usually a mask of smug assurance, went completely blank, then shifted to a sort of bewildered hostility. But let's back up a little, because to understand the weight of that silence, you need to understand the life he crashed. The one I was living before his existence became a toxic singularity in my universe. My life was, honestly, good, maybe even annoyingly stable. I was Howard Jenkins, and I worked as a senior developer at Stellar Tech. It was a solid, middle-tier IT company. Not a startup, not a giant, just steady. We did back-end enterprise solutions. Boring, but the paychecks cleared. I liked the logic of the work, the clean, undeniable truth of code. And I loved my life outside the office. Sarah and I had been married for 6 years. We met in college. She was an art history major, which was hilarious considering I literally spoke in binary. She was all color and feeling. I was all structure and debugging. We had this cozy little bungalow in the suburbs, the kind with a ridiculously large maple tree in the front yard. Our evenings were predictable. I'd come home. She'd be painting or teaching an online class. We'd cook something too ambitious from a YouTube video, and then settle in for a documentary we'd both inevitably fall asleep during. It was quiet, it was routine, and I wouldn't have traded it for anything. We were planning a trip to Italy. We were talking about maybe starting a family next year. It felt like the trajectory of our lives was perfectly set, ascending. Together, then came Victor Vance. He wasn't just a new boss. He was a disruptive force. He arrived at Stellar Tech about 2 years before the explosion, brought in as a new CTO to modernize the infrastructure and inject some passion, which apparently meant buying the most expensive espresso machine and installing a rotating tap in the break room. Victor was all sharp suits, booming laughter, and that expensive cologne I would later learn to hate. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, even if he was talking over you. He was charismatic in the same way a crocodile is impressive, beautifully sleek, but you know he's just waiting to bite. I was actually kind of starstruck at first. He praised my work on the new data migration platform, called me a hidden talent, and started pulling me into executive meetings. He made me feel important. He was my mentor, my champion. He was the reason I was dreaming of finally moving up to director of architecture. He was the reason I started dressing a little sharper, working a little later, trying a little harder. Sarah even liked him. I remember the first and only time he came over for a team-building dinner. It was awkward, of course, because Victor was too slick for a suburban barbecue, but he was charming. He complimented Sarah's cooking, a ridiculously detailed assessment of her homemade pesto, and they got into a long, animated discussion about Renaissance portraiture. I remember watching them, thinking, man, my wife is so smart and my boss is so impressive. I have it all. That memory now tastes like ash in my mouth. It was like watching the prologue of a Greek tragedy and thinking it's a comedy. Victor started working closely with my team, which meant he was around me all the time, and by extension, he started crossing paths with Sarah more often. She occasionally came by the office to drop off lunch or meet me for a quick coffee. At first, it was just the three of us exchanging pleasantries. Victor always had a sly comment about Sarah's outfit or her smile. Things that sounded like compliments on the surface, but always felt a little too personal, a little too charged. I dismissed it as Victor being Victor. Overly enthusiastic, boundaryless. There was one specific moment, a small, ridiculous, domestic detail that stands out. We were on a team video call, and I was working from home in my office, which was right off the kitchen. Sarah was walking past, and she stopped to quietly put a hand on my shoulder, checking on me. Victor, who was presenting on screen, paused his aggressive slideshow about synergy. He just stared at her hand on my shoulder, a faint, unreadable smile playing on his lips. Then he just said, Howard, always the comfort of home. Some of us can only dream. He didn't mean it as a compliment. It felt predatory. It felt like he was clocking her presence, marking his territory. Even then, the innocence of my early days with Stellar Tech, the genuine belief that I was part of a team, that my boss was a good man, and that my marriage was rock solid, it all evaporated later, of course. But for a beautiful, terrifyingly fragile period, I had that. I had the perfectly set life. And the man who sat behind that mahogany desk, who pretended to mentor me, was already digging the foundation out from underneath it, piece by careful piece. We were a team, Sarah and I. We were an upwardly mobile professional couple. I was building a career, and she was building her own business. Our life was comfortable, easy, and full of plans. The irony is that Victor Vance was the only unexpected variable I welcomed into that comfortable equation, and he was the one who blew it up. When I look back, I see all the tiny, flashing warning signs I ignored, the little cracks in facade that I papered over with trust and the sheer, idiotic belief in the decency of others. I thought people acted honorably. Victor taught me that some people act only on their immediate, selfish desire, and they don't care if they have it demolished to get what they want. The slow creep of suspicion is a terrible thing. It's not like a sudden explosion. It's more like a virus, subtle at first, then it starts eating away at the core of everything you believe. For me, the first symptom, the one I couldn't ignore, was a text message. A tiny, insignificant flicker of light on a screen. But it was a red pill moment that pulled me out of my comfortable delusion and into a harsh, ugly reality. It was a Monday evening, maybe 8 months after Victor had joined Stellar Tech. We were watching a terrible sci-fi movie, one with questionable special effects and even more questionable dialogue. Sarah had fallen asleep with her head on my shoulder, her phone resting face up on the coffee table. It buzzed. It was a late-night work text. I assumed something about a class she was teaching, or maybe her mom. I barely glanced at it. But then it buzzed again, followed by another one almost immediately. The screen was illuminated enough for me to see the sender's name. VV. I thought, Victor Vance? Why is my boss texting my wife at 10 p.m. on Monday? My stomach did that slow, heavy flip. I told myself it was about the pesto recipe she'd shared that night he came over, or maybe some corporate thing I wasn't privy to. Anything but that. The curiosity was a physical itch. I gently nudged Sarah's head so I could lean forward and pick up the phone. My hands were shaking a little, but I chalked it up to low blood sugar. I unlocked it. I knew her simple 4-digit code and went straight to the messages from VV. The first text I saw, the very first one, wasn't cryptic or ambiguous. It was a single devastating sentence. Last night was incredible. Can't wait for next week. It was like getting slapped in the face with a frozen fish. The air rushed out of the room. The cheap, Digital explosions on the TV screen suddenly sounded distant and irrelevant. I felt this intense, roaring silence in my ears. I scrolled up and up. It wasn't just two texts. It was a whole timeline of coded communication dating back months. What started as seemingly innocent work messages, need to discuss the Q3 metrics, maybe over dinner, had devolved into blatant, sickening exchanges. They used inside jokes, pet names I didn't recognize, and constant references to our secret spot and our lunchtime escape. Lunchtime. I remembered so many times Sarah had told me she was having a heavy teaching load and was just grabbing a quick salad at home. Those weren't quick salads. The sickest part was seeing the way they talked about me. I wasn't Howard, her loving husband. I was the programmer, or the kid with the code. In one particularly brutal exchange, Victor had written, "I almost felt bad today." The programmer was talking about buying a boat. Sarah's reply, with a laughing emoji, was, "Don't. He'd just spent all his time debugging the GPS. You're more than enough excitement for both of us." That laughing emoji, that single yellow, ridiculous circle of joy was the moment the floor truly fell out from under me. It wasn't just an affair. It was a collaborative act of contempt and betrayal. They weren't just sneaking around. They were bonding over how pathetic they thought I was. All the things I loved about our life, the home, the plans, the stability, they saw as a cage I was too stupid to realize I was in. I didn't wake Sarah up. I couldn't. I locked her phone and placed it back on the table. Then I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and leaned on the cold granite countertop until my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry. The emotion wasn't sadness or even anger yet. It was a profound, chilling clarity. It felt like I had been wearing slightly tinted glasses for 6 years, and they had just been ripped off. Everything was sharper, colder, and terrifyingly real. I spent the rest of that night in my office chair. I didn't confront her immediately. That would have been rash. That would have been the old, emotional Howard. The new Howard, the one forged in the white-hot shame of those texts, needed a process to analyze the code of the situation. I needed proof that was undeniable. Outside of a phone, I didn't want to steal. Over the next few days, I became a ghost in my own house. I was hyper-aware of every glance, every quiet phone call, every late arrival. I started wearing one of my old, scratchy tweed jackets to work, the one with a massive inner pocket. Inside that pocket, I placed a small, discreet digital voice recorder. I was going to confront Victor first, on his turf, where he couldn't hide behind Sarah's tears or confusion. The tension was a tight wire. I walked around Stellar Tech feeling like I had a giant neon sign flashing, cuckold above my head, but no one saw it. Victor was just as charming, just as loud, just as complimentary. Howard, my man, that data sync is flawless. Truly exceptional work. He put a hand on my shoulder, that same hand that had just been typing sickening sweet nothings to my wife. The physical contact made my skin crawl. It was a game of chicken, and I was waiting for the perfect intersection. I finally caught him in his corner office late on a Friday afternoon. He was alone, reviewing papers, his feet up on the desk again. I walked in without knocking, closing the door firmly behind me. That got his attention. He looked up, annoyed. "Howard? What is it?" "I'm trying to close out my week." I walked right up to his massive mahogany desk and placed a small, worn, white hotel room key card right in the center of his blotter. It was from the Grand City Hotel, a place fancy enough to be discreet. I'd found it cleaning out Sarah's jacket pocket that morning. "Is this yours, Victor?" I asked. My voice was low, flat, and completely steady. The recorder in my pocket was running, its tiny red light blinking relentlessly. The silence after my question was immediate and absolute. The smooth jazz was still playing faintly, but it sounded like mockery. Victor looked at the key card. His eyes narrowed. He looked at me. The charming smile he usually wore was completely gone, replaced by a look of calculation. He didn't ask how I got it. He didn't even try to deny it. He just sighed a long, theatrical breath, like I was the one inconveniencing him. "Howard," he finally said, leaning back in his chair, picking up the key card and flipping it idly between his fingers. "Let's not be dramatic. Let's not be dramatic? I repeated his words, but my voice was completely devoid of tone. I was just reporting the facts of his sentence back to him. The tiny recorder in my pocket was capturing every syllable, every tremor of the mahogany desk beneath his hands. I needed that recording, not for a messy legal fight, but for my own sanity, to prove this appalling moment was real. Victor leaned back, dropping the key card into his desk drawer with a dismissive flick. He looked me up and down, and a horrible, condescending smirk spread across his face, the kind of look a wealthy man gives a waiter who just spilled soup. "Look, Howard," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate tone that was supposed to sound confiding but felt utterly manipulative. "I thought you were smarter than this. We're adults, aren't we? Things get complicated. Sarah and I, we have a different kind of spark. A fire, if you will. You and her, you had a nice little routine, a comfortable partnership. But let's be honest, Howard, you were always more passionate about your algorithms than your wife. You left a vacuum, and I filled it." The audacity of the statement was breathtaking. He wasn't apologizing. He was blaming me. He was framing my betrayal as a lack of effort on my part, a consequence of my own shortcomings. The sheer narcissism was staggering. A vacuum? I finally managed. The word tasted metallic on my tongue. "You are my boss, Victor. You came into my home. I looked up to you. You were supposed to be my mentor." He actually chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that scraped against my nerves. "Oh, the mentor bit? That's business, Howard. The truth is, you're good with code, absolutely brilliant at the tedious stuff. But you're meek. You lack fire, you lack killer instinct. That's why you're stuck at senior developer." Sarah noticed it, too. She wants to feel alive, not just maintained. And I can give her that. He gestured around his office. The skyline view, the expensive artwork. This is what women are drawn to. Howard, not suburban bungalows and nightly documentaries. It's power. It's risk. It's being in a room where the deals happen. My hands were balled into fists in my pockets, gripping the small, smooth casing of the voice recorder. I wanted to smash that expensive mahogany desk. I wanted to wipe that sickening smirk off his face. But I remembered the text. I remembered the need for clarity, and I held back, an iron band tightening around my rage. "So this is it?" I asked, forcing myself to be calm. "You admit you're having an affair with my wife, and now you're going to lecture me on my emotional deficiencies?" Victor shrugged, reaching for a leather-bound folio on his desk. "I admit we've been spending time together, yes, and I'm giving you some career advice, free of charge. You're taking this personally, and that's your first mistake. I suggest you handle the marital fallout quietly. Take the house, take the furniture. Just don't make a mess here. This company doesn't need that kind of drama." He opened the folio and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the desk toward me. It was a memo bearing the Stellar Tech letterhead. "As a matter of fact, Howard," he continued, his tone switching abruptly to his official corporate voice, cold and sharp. "Your performance reviews for the last quarter have been volatile. Your focus has clearly been compromised. I'm reassigning you, effective immediately. Consider this your demotion notice." I stared at the paper. It was an internal transfer form. It wasn't a firing, but it might as well have been. My title was being shifted from senior developer, platform architecture, to night shift support specialist, data services. Night shift, data services. That was the IT equivalent of being sent to Siberia. It meant working from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., managing the server backups, essentially a glorified babysitter for the hardware. A job for a junior hired straight out of technical college. Not someone who was heading a team. It was a humiliating, career-stalling move. "You're doing this because I caught you," I stated, my voice finally cracking with incredulous shock. "You're using your position to punish me." "I'm using my discretion to ensure the continued smooth operation of my department, Howard," he corrected me, his eyes now hard, completely devoid of the faux friendliness he usually wore. "And frankly, you've been a liability. Go handle your personal life. When you decide to act like a professional again, maybe we can talk about a transfer back to the day team. Maybe." He stood up, signaling the conversation was over. He walked around the desk, his hands resting on his hips as he looked out at the massive skyline, completely dominating the room. The sheer height of him, the arrogance of his stance, it was designed to make me feel small and powerless. "Now, collect your personal items from your old cube," he said, his voice flat. "The night team is expecting you to start their shift tonight. And Howard, don't mention this outside this office. For your own sake." He turned back to me, and that sickening smirk returned, this time laced with triumph. "And tell Sarah I'll see her later this week." That was the final cut. That last casual, arrogant reference to my wife. It wasn't just a demotion. It was a public declaration of war, and he had just spiked the ball in my face. I looked at the transfer paper, then at him, standing silhouetted against the bright city lights. The rage I had been suppressing, the cold, analytical focus, finally burst into a white-hot flash. But I didn't say another word. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I simply nodded once, a gesture that he mistook for submission. I turned on my heel and walked out of the corner office, closing the door softly behind me. That silence, that soft click of the door latch, was the sound of my old life ending. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that I wouldn't be coming back to Stellar Tech as a night shift support specialist. I would be coming back, but it would be on my terms. And I wouldn't stop until I was standing right where he was, looking down at him. I walked out that executive wing, not as Howard Jenkins, the pathetic, cheated husband, but as a man who had just been handed a roadmap to his own survival. The demotion wasn't a punishment. It was a distraction. Victor thought he'd put me in a box, a dark, lonely corner where I would just fade away. He was wrong. He had just given me a solid 8 hours every night where I could plot and execute my revenge without anyone looking over my shoulder. The humiliation, though, that was immediate and visceral. When I went back to my old cube to pack my personal effects, my Star Wars mug, a framed photo of Sarah and me on our honeymoon, it was like walking through a minefield of pity and judgment. People were avoiding eye contact. My former teammates, people I had gone a happy hour with for years, suddenly found their screens fascinating. But one guy, Greg, from a neighboring team, actually stopped me. He leaned in close, whispering, "Dude, what happened?" "We heard you were moved to night shift. And that Victor is—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. His eyes drifted toward the executive offices, and his meaning was clear. Victor hadn't just demoted me. He had made a public display of my downfall. "Performance review," I said flatly, forcing a weak smile. "Needed a change of pace." Greg just gave me this look of pure, uncomfortable skepticism, and then he made a mistake of trying to cheer me up. "Hey, chin up, man. Night shift isn't so bad. You get the place to yourself. Less micromanaging." "Less micromanaging," I repeated, locking eyes with him. Perfect. That night was the longest and coldest night of my life, metaphorically and literally. The Stellar Tech office building was a ghost ship after 9 p.m. The air conditioning was cranked so high it felt like working in a meat locker. I sat at a nondescript, temporary desk in the sub-basement data center, surrounded by the rhythmic, deafening whir of the server racks. It was a physical manifestation of my new, isolated reality. My job was ridiculous. I was running backup scripts, monitoring disk space, and occasionally rebooting a cranky ancient server that should have been decommissioned years ago. The kind of work that required about 30 minutes of actual effort spread over 8 hours. That left me with 7.5 hours of pure, uninterrupted time. I didn't waste a second of it. The emotional wreckage of the past week had been staggering. Sarah and I had a miserable, screaming, tear-filled confrontation. When I got home from the office that first day, she didn't deny it. She went straight to the victim playbook, claiming she felt unseen and that Victor was the only person who understood her ambition. That whole speech felt like it was lifted directly from a bad movie script, probably one Victor had coached her on. I packed a suitcase that night and drove to an extended stay motel that smelled vaguely of chlorine and despair. The divorce was fast and ugly. Once I presented my lawyer with the evidence I'd gathered, including the damning recording from Victor's office. Sarah's lawyer quickly advised her to take a quiet settlement. She didn't fight for the house or the savings. She just wanted out and wanted it done before Victor's name was officially dragged into the legal proceedings. Victor, predictably, was nowhere to be seen during this time, except an occasional smug photo Sarah would post online, a nice dinner, a weekend trip. He was flaunting his win. The divorce finalized 3 months after the demotion. I was legally single, homeless, temporarily, and professionally adrift, but the emotional pain, the feeling of being discarded, had burned away the weakness. It left behind a core of solid, white-hot resolve. That's when the planning started. Every night, in the quiet solitude of the basement, with the servers as my only audience, I began to build my counterattack. I had 3 objectives. Escape. Get out of Stellar Tech. I couldn't just quit. I needed leverage. Acquire power. Find a position that put me not just on Victor's level, but distinctly above it. Execute. Deliver the payback personally, professionally, and publicly. The key to the first 2 points lay in my network. I wasn't like Victor. I didn't rely on charm and arrogance. I relied on performance and reputation. Over the years, I had forged deep professional relationships with key architects and engineers at Stellar Tech, and, crucially, at our major competitors. I started making calls and sending encrypted messages to the people who mattered, people who knew my work ethic, not my personal drama. I used my night shift hours to study Stellar Tech's financials and infrastructure in ways I never had before. I had access to all the back-end systems, and no one was watching. I learned where the company was weak, what its vulnerabilities were, and why Victor Vance, despite his swagger, was actually a major threat to its stability. He was spending a fortune on flashy, unnecessary contracts, all for the appearance of modernization. Stellar Tech was a house of cards, and Victor was busy throwing a party on the roof. The more I learned, the more focused I became. My plan had to be bigger than simply getting a new job. I needed a position where I could literally control Victor's future, where I could look him in the eye and say, "Your entire existence here is now dependent on my approval." This required an entirely different level of ambition, a level I never knew I possessed. I needed to leapfrog the typical career trajectory. I needed a catalyst. I needed a rival company, one that was aggressive, ambitious, and looking to expand its market share by any means necessary. That company was Novatech Solutions. They were Stellar Tech's most aggressive competitor, known for ruthless, rapid growth, often fueled by hostile takeovers. I knew their chief architect, a brilliant, cutthroat woman named Evelyn Reed, from a few industry conferences. She respected skill and had zero tolerance for corporate politics. She was my target. The goal was no longer just a new job. The goal was to become an integral part of Novatech's strategy to destroy Stellar Tech. And Victor Vance would be the first casualty. The lonely nights in the IT basement became my workshop, and my bitterness became the fuel. The air smelled of ozone and stale coffee, but to me, it smelled like opportunity. Every time I ran those mandatory, mind-numbingly simple backup scripts, I had 7 hours of Victor Vance's clock ticking away in the background, while he was out enjoying his evenings with my ex-wife. Thinking he'd won, I was systematically dismantling the very foundation of his corporate perch. The plan was cold, precise, and completely focused. It wasn't fueled by fleeting anger anymore. It was a long-game chess match. The first step was to leverage my network, and the night shift provided the perfect cover. Who would question a guy working the graveyard shift being glued to his screen? Everyone assumed I was just debugging or monitoring. In reality, I was conducting high-level, covert communication with industry players. My target was Evelyn Reed, the chief architect at Novatech Solutions. Novatech wasn't just a rival. They were a corporate predator. They didn't grow organically. They grew by acquisition and brute force market dominance. I knew Evelyn, and I knew what she valued: data, efficiency, and a willingness to step on next to get the job done. She respected results. I started by sending her a completely innocuous email, something about a legacy API vulnerability I'd found years ago that was still plaguing the entire industry. It was a technical bait-and-switch. She replied within hours, impressed by the depth of my analysis. That opened the door. My next communication was more targeted. I didn't send a resume. Instead, I sent her an anonymized, highly technical white paper on the structural weaknesses of Stellar Tech's internal infrastructure. I knew exactly which contracts Victor had pushed through, which systems were underperforming, and how easily they could be exploited or integrated into a superior framework. I didn't mention my name or my company. I just presented the raw, undeniable data. Evelyn's response to that paper was a single cryptic text message to my burner phone, which I'd acquired specifically for this purpose. "Who are you?" "We need to talk." "My office." Midnight. That was the validation I needed. She didn't offer a job interview. She issued a summons. She saw the value of the information and the mind behind it. The preparation for that first meeting was obsessive. I spent a week analyzing Novatech's entire corporate structure, their recent acquisitions, and Evelyn's personal career history. I wasn't going to walk in there as a job seeker. I was going to walk in as a strategic asset, a piece of the puzzle that Evelyn didn't even know she was missing. The meeting itself felt like something out of a spy movie. I drove across town on a Tuesday night, leaving my empty Stellar Tech lot parking spot precisely at 11:30 p.m. Novatech's headquarters was a gleaming, state-of-the-art tower, the polar opposite of Stellar Tech's dreary brick building. The lobby was all brushed steel and neon light. I was met by a stone-faced security guard who already had my name and led me straight up to the top floor, Evelyn Reed's private domain. Evelyn was exactly as I remembered, sharp, impeccably dressed, and radiating competence. She didn't offer a handshake or small talk. She just pointed to a chair across a glass-top table that probably cost more than my entire divorce settlement. "I only have 20 minutes, she said, her voice low and completely businesslike. "The white paper you sent, it's devastatingly accurate. You have access to Stellar Tech's financials, or you're a clairvoyant. Which is it?" "I have access to the data, which is often more telling than the financials," I replied, keeping my own voice measured. "I know where they are spending wastefully, where they are dangerously dependent on legacy systems, and most importantly, I know the exact value of their IP if it were properly migrated." I laid out a custom-printed, high-level analysis on the table. It wasn't a resume. It was a takeover blueprint. I detailed exactly how Novatech could acquire Stellar Tech, not just for its market share, but for its hidden, underutilized assets. I even included a detailed risk assessment of the executive team. I didn't name Victor Vance, but I describe him perfectly. A charismatic, politically focused CTO whose expenditures are primarily aimed at self-promotion, leading to critical infrastructure neglect. Evelyn listened, her expression unreadable, her eyes glued to the documents. When I finished, the silence was heavy. "You've mapped out the entire acquisition," she finally said, leaning back. "Why? Why bring this to us instead of just asking for a raise from your current company?" This was the moment. The truth had to be delivered with the same cold clarity as the data. "Stellar Tech is a sinking ship, Ms. Reed," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "And the captain is a man who destroyed my life. He used his position to ruin my marriage and professionally humiliate me." I paused, letting the emotion hover in the air, but keeping my own voice steady. "I don't just want a job, Ms. Reed. I want a seat at the table when Novatech acquires Stellar Tech. I want to be the executive who oversees the integration, the one who cleans house. I want to be his boss. If I deliver the acquisition to you on a platter, what is that worth?" Evelyn didn't flinch. She just smiled, a small, genuine smile that was somehow more terrifying than Victor's smirk. "It's worth whatever you want, Mr. Jenkins," she said, finally using my name. "The man who can deliver this level of strategic intelligence, with this much personal motivation, is precisely the kind of executive we need. You won't be the chief architect. You'll be the executive vice president of strategic integration for the newly acquired assets. Your first assignment will be the full transition and restructuring of Stellar Tech. We start tomorrow." The deal was done, not with lawyers and contracts, but with a simple, chilling handshake across a polished glass table. I had successfully parlayed my personal catastrophe into a corporate war chest. I walked out of Novatech headquarters that night, not just with a new job, but with a weapon. And Victor Vance was standing squarely in the crosshairs. The handshake with Evelyn Reed wasn't just a professional agreement. It was a pact. The moment I became the executive vice president of strategic integration for Novatech, I ceased being Howard Jenkins, the vengeful ex-husband. I became an instrument. I moved into an apartment in the city, signed the non-disclosure agreements, and immediately started working with Evelyn's top legal and financial teams. My new life was a blur of spreadsheets, due diligence reports, and late-night war room meetings where the sole topic was the systematic dismantling of Stellar Tech. I was finally working on the day's shift again, but I was working my shift. I was pulling 12 to 14-hour days, fueled by ambition and the cold, hard knowledge of what was waiting for me at the end of this road. Victor Vance and Sarah had thought they were rid of me. They thought I was stuck down in the basement with the humming servers, a ghost in the corporate machine. Now, I was a ghost in their future, meticulously crafting the strategy that would erase Victor's name from the CTO plaque. My former life became a distant memory, a motivational film clip I would occasionally play back to stave off exhaustion. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? Sarah used a joke about all the weird products we'd try from those, as seen on TV ads. Now, I barely remember what her voice sounded like when she wasn't yelling about lawyers. All that was left was the mission. The first few months were spent in a deep dive into Stellar Tech's public filings and internal infrastructure, which I knew better than anyone. I cross-referenced Victor's aggressive spending on superficial, high-profile projects with a genuine neglect of critical back-end systems. I highlighted the precise moments Victor's mismanagement created massive security and integration liabilities. My reports weren't just data. They were a narrative, a story of a charismatic leader who put ego over engineering. The leverage point isn't their market capitalization, Evelyn. I explained in one meeting, tapping a pen on a dense chart. It's their antiquated cloud migration project. Victor promised the board a smooth, proprietary transition, but it's a failure. They've sunk tens of millions into a bespoke system that is now a critical point of failure. If we acquire them, we can instantly stabilize their infrastructure by migrating them onto our Novatech platform, saving them the cost and risk of fixing Victor's mistake. That gives us a justification for a hard reset of the entire executive leadership. Evelyn just nodded, her eyes glittering with predatory approval. You are proving to be an invaluable asset, Howard. Your personal motivation, as you called it, is certainly driving excellent results. I felt no warmth from the compliment. It was purely transactional. I was an asset, and the asset was about to pay a massive dividend. Around the 6-month mark, the acquisition talks became serious. We moved from internal analysis to external maneuvers. Novatech started quietly buying up large blocks of Stellar Tech stock, driving the price up just enough to signal interest without triggering a full market panic. The industry grapevine started buzzing. Novatech is targeting a major enterprise solution provider. Who could it be? It was a delicious, slow burn. I started seeing articles pop up in industry journals about speculation on a major sector consolidation and aggressive acquisition strategies. I knew Victor must be reading them. He must be getting nervous. He was a creature of comfort and control, and the idea of a hostile takeover would be his worst nightmare. I still had a couple of innocuous, long-lost friends on the day's shift at Stellar Tech who occasionally complained to me about work. I maintained these purely as listening posts. One guy, Greg, the one who had pitted me after the demotion, called me one night. "Howard, you won't believe the vibe here," he whispered into the phone, clearly calling from a back alley or a supply closet. "Victor is losing it. He's snapping at everyone. He just fired 3 senior managers in the last week, claiming they're sabotaging his vision. Everyone thinks he's trying to clean house before the rumored acquisition." "Rumored?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Yeah, everyone knows Novatech is circling. We just don't know who the target is. But Victor is acting like we're next. He's obsessed with strategic defense plans." "He's terrified of them," Greg confirmed. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair in my slick Novatech office, looking out at the glittering city skyline, a view far superior to Victor's. The realization hit me. Victor wasn't just my target. He was my unwitting collaborator. By being arrogant, reckless, and publicly humiliating me, he had created the perfect circumstances for his own downfall. His current paranoia and mismanagement were only weakening StellarTech's defenses, making Novatech's acquisition strategy even easier and cheaper. I spent the next 2 months refining the integration strategy. It was a document hundreds of pages long, detailing the structure of the new company. But the most important part was a single appendix titled Executive Transition Plan. I designed this plan with one person in mind. I outlined immediate resignation of the entire C-suite, starting with the CEO, the CFO, and naturally, the CTO, Victor Vance. I even crafted the job description for the one role that would be offered to him, Senior Data Archival Specialist, Legacy Systems. It was my old night shift job, rebranded, the perfect, poetic, professional demotion. The negotiation phase of the acquisition was intense, but Novatech was armed with the data I provided, giving them an overwhelming advantage. They knew StellarTech's weaknesses better than StellarTech did. The final price was agreed upon. The papers were drawn up, and the date for the official takeover was set. It was time for the final act. I packed my leather portfolio with the Executive Transition Plan, a beautiful, bound document that felt heavy with justice. The stage was set. Victor had no idea the storm was already inside the building. The acquisition rumors started swirling from whispers to a full-blown roar. For me, they were less rumors and more countdown markers. Novatech's aggressive stock purchases and the thinly veiled articles in the business press had done their job. StellarTech was in a state of barely contained panic, and the man panicking the most was, predictably, Victor Vance. My role at Novatech was shifting from planning to execution. I was no longer just the EVP of strategic integration. I was the point person for the hostile takeover, the one dictating the terms and the timeline. This level of power was intoxicating, but I kept it locked down, fueled by that year I spent in the basement. I remembered the cold, the isolation, and the casual cruelty Victor had shown me. That memory was my anchor. Victor, meanwhile, was completely oblivious to the fact that I was the ghost in his machine. He saw the company being circled by a predator, but he was looking for a corporate spy in the executive suite, not a vengeful former junior employee who now held the keys to the kingdom. He was firing people who posed a political threat to him, completely missing the structural threat I had exposed. My listening post at StellarTech, my old friend Greg, kept feeding me updates. The atmosphere in the StellarTech offices was toxic. Victor had implemented absurd, complex new security protocols that were slowing down every department, all in a paranoid attempt to prevent leaks. "It's chaos, Howard," Greg told me one day, his voice shaky. "He's making us work weekends to implement a new VPN that doesn't even work with half our legacy systems. Everyone hates him, but he's terrified of getting fired, so he's just lashing out. He told us yesterday that anyone caught even talking to anyone from Novatech will be terminated immediately." I smiled a slow, cold smile, hanging up the phone. Victor was preparing a defense against a frontal assault, while I was already inside the walls, setting the detonators. He was burning bridges, isolating himself, and actively sabotaging the company's efficiency, all which only deepened Novatech's leverage and justified my eventual, planned-out executive transition. The final weeks before the takeover were a blur of due diligence and ironclad legal work. Evelyn and I were working side by side, and she recognized the sheer value of my deep-seated knowledge of StellarTech's weaknesses. She saw the data. I saw the person who made the data look so bad. It was a perfect, mutually beneficial relationship built on cold, hard ambition. Then came the moment that changed everything, the final pitch meeting. This wasn't some grand, cinematic event. It was a small, high-stakes meeting in a sterile, windowless conference room at Novatech headquarters. The audience was Evelyn Reed, the Novatech CEO, and 2 of their heaviest-hitting board members. I was presenting the final, streamlined version of my integration plan, the plan that would greenlight the full-scale acquisition offer. I stood at the podium, a laser pointer in my hand, feeling the weight of the moment. I was about to officially authorize the destruction of the place that had destroyed my life. I started the presentation with the financial models, the projections, and the immense value proposition. I talked about market share and IP portfolios. But then I shifted gears. I brought up a slide with a simple, unlabeled schematic of Stellar Tech's internal network architecture. It highlighted a single, massive, red highlighted box. "This, ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice cutting to the silence of the room, "is the reason Stellar Tech is undervalued and ripe for acquisition. It is their proprietary, failed cloud migration project. It represents an expenditure of over $40 million and is currently responsible for over 40% of their weekly systems downtime." I went on to detail the entire history of the project, including the internal reports Victor Vance had suppressed, the vendors he had pushed through with zero oversight, and the fact that the entire system was effectively a glorified, unstable patch job. I didn't mention Victor by name, but everyone in the room knew I was talking about the CTO. I was presenting a comprehensive case that the current executive leadership was not just incompetent, but actively negligent. The CEO of Novatech, a famously stern man named Mr. Harrington, steepled his fingers on the table. "Mr. Jenkins," he said, his voice slow and heavy. "This level of detail suggests a deep, intimate knowledge of their operational failures. You seem to know Stellar Tech better than their own CTO." "I do, sir," I replied without hesitation. I was, for a period, tasked with monitoring the stability of the servers supporting this very system. I saw the failures in real time. I know exactly where the bodies are buried. I then unveiled the final slide, the executive transition plan. I went through the entire C-suite, explaining why each person needed to be transitioned out immediately. When I reached the CTO section, I paused, looking directly at Mr. Harrington. "The CTO, Victor Vance, needs to be handled delicately," I explained. "We can't just fire him immediately. That could invite a media backlash. Instead, we offer him a professional soft landing, a position as a senior data archival specialist for the legacy systems. It's an insulated, non-executive role, a demotion that is technically a lateral transfer, keeping him out of the new organizational structure, but off the unemployment line. He takes a title, or he gets nothing." I could see Evelyn trying to suppress a smile. Mr. Harrington, however, just looked at me with a calculating gaze. "You seem quite invested in this particular disposition, Mr. Jenkins." "I am invested in the cleanest, most efficient integration possible, sir," I countered, meeting his stare. "Mr. Vance is a distraction and a liability. This plan removes him professionally, ethically, and without creating legal exposure. It is the most surgical option." Harrington didn't push it further. He looked at the board members, who all gave subtle nods of assent. He closed the meeting with a single, conclusive statement. "The offer goes out tomorrow, Mr. Jenkins. You have delivered the case. Now, you will deliver the company. You will oversee the integration." I walked out of that room a different man. The plan was no longer just a blueprint. It was a mandate. I was officially going back to Stellar Tech, not as Howard Jenkins, the demoted coder, but as the executive who was about to decide Victor Vance's fate. The final, exhilarating step was just days away. I felt the weight of that leather portfolio, now no longer heavy with revenge, but with definitive, undeniable victory. The final act began not with a bang, but with a series of rapidly escalating, undeniable tremors. For 2 days, the industry news was dominated by a single headline. Novatech executes definitive merger agreement with Stellar Tech. The news hit Stellar Tech like a massive tidal wave. The stock trading was halted. The phones were ringing off the hook. The building that was once Victor's fortress was now a pressure cooker. I watched the chaos unfold from the safety of my sleek Novatech office, monitoring internal news feeds, and keeping my line open to Evelyn and the legal team. My instructions were simple. Stay completely off the grid until the acquisition was legally sealed and the Novatech executive team was ready to make their physical move. I was the hidden asset, the Trojan horse ready to step out and take control. I kept thinking back to my time in the basement. All those lonely hours, the constant drone of the servers, the feeling of being discarded. That isolation had been my greatest gift. It gave me the mental space and the time to see the whole system, the personal drama, and the corporate structure with icy clarity. Now, the system was collapsing exactly as I had planned. Greg, bless his heart, called me in a panic, completely unaware that he was speaking to the orchestrator of his company's destruction. Howard, it's insane here. Security is locking down the servers. Victor is running around like a headless chicken, demanding to know if anyone has heard from Novatech. He's trying to call the board, but they won't take his calls. Everyone is packing their desks. Do you think we're all going to be fired? Just keep your head down, Greg. I advise, my voice calm. Don't pack anything yet. Just wait for an official communication from Novatech. And whatever you do, do not sign anything Victor gives you. Victor, the man who thrived on control and arrogance, was now experiencing the total, terrifying loss of both. He thought he was playing the corporate game. He didn't realize I had changed the rules and the scoreboard. He was in survival mode, trying to spin his failed projects into essential assets, frantically trying to prove his worth to the new owners he hadn't even met. The pinnacle of the mounting drama came on the evening before the official takeover. Novatech's CEO, Mr. Harrington, called me into his office. The blinds were drawn, and the atmosphere was thick with the scent of victory. Mr. Jenkins, he said, looking at me with a newfound respect that felt earned, the transaction closes at 9 a.m. sharp tomorrow. The Stellar Tech executive team is being gathered at their headquarters for a mandatory briefing. You will be part of the initial wave of Novatech executives entering the building. You are the architect of the integration, and you will be in charge of the personnel transition. Specifically, the former CTO. He slid a glossy, bound document across the desk. It was my executive transition plan, stamped with the official Novatech seal of approval. The job description for Victor Vance, Senior Data Archival Specialist, Legacy Systems, was highlighted in sharp corporate red. I want a clean, professional transition, Harrington continued. No unnecessary drama. Deliver the offer, get his acceptance or his formal refusal, and then escort him off the premises. The position of Executive Vice President of Strategic Integration is officially yours, contingent on the successful completion of this mission. This was it, the final mission briefing. All the pain, all the demotion, the humiliation, it was being channeled into this single, high-stakes moment of professional payback. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I just picked up the document, holding the weight of Victor's future in my hands. I spent that night in the motel room I had rented when I first left Sarah. It felt like coming full circle. I laid out the suit I would wear, the same custom-cut midnight blue suit. I polished my shoes until they reflected the harsh motel light. I reviewed the transition plan one last time, focusing not on the technical details, but on precise, measured delivery of the final blow. I didn't want him to just be fired. I wanted him to be publicly, humiliatingly demoted to the very kind of work he had forced upon me, the very kind of work he had mocked me for doing. He needed to understand that the programmer with the code was the one who controlled his destiny. The next morning, I drove to Stellar Tech headquarters, not in my old beat-up sedan, but in a sleek, black Novatech corporate SUV, chauffeured by a driver holding a clipboard. We pulled into the executive parking lot, and the security guard, who used to nod respectfully to Victor and ignore me, now snapped to attention, recognizing the Novatech logo. I walked through the lobby, and the atmosphere was electric with fear. Employees were huddled in groups, whispering. Their faces were etched with anxiety. I kept walking, my pace steady and controlled, not meeting anyone's eyes. I was no longer a colleague. I was the judge. I met the Novatech entry team, a formidable group of lawyers, HR executives, and security consultants. In the main boardroom, we were given our marching orders. They would secure the servers, the legal documents, and the key financial offices. My job was singular. The CTO. I stood there, looking at my reflection in the glass wall of the boardroom, adjusting the knot of my tie. The old Howard Jenkins was just a faint echo. This new man, the EVP of Strategic Integration, was ready. I picked up my portfolio, containing Victor Vance's fate, and started the long walk up to the executive wing. The plush carpet felt triumphant beneath my feet. The door to the executive wing, the same one I'd stood outside years ago, was now open, guarded by 2 Novatech security officers. I nodded to them, and they let me pass. The final corridor was quiet, and there it was, Victor Vance's corner office. The door was closed. I didn't hesitate. I walked right up, bypassed the need to knock, and wrapped my hand around the brass knob. I was finally walking back into that office, not as the victim, but as the new ultimate authority. I pushed the door open. Slowly, deliberately. The sight inside was exactly as I had seen it that night a year ago. Only this time, the atmosphere was thick with a palpable tension that had nothing to do with me. Victor Vance was sitting at his massive mahogany desk, still facing the window and the incredible city view, but he wasn't talking on the phone or listening to smooth jazz. He was staring out the skyline, a picture of forced composure that was rapidly cracking at the edges. He turned at the sound of the door, closing behind me. His eyes, normally sharp and dismissive, were wide with a mix of panic and utter confusion. He'd clearly been expecting a lawyer, or maybe Mr. Harrington himself, someone who represented the cold, corporate entity of Novatech. He was expecting an executioner, but not me. He squinted, trying to place the perfectly tailored suit, the confident stance. The processing delay was brutal to watch. Then, recognition hit him, and the color drained from his face. The bewilderment shifted instantly into disbelief, then a sickening defensive rage. "Howard, what in God's name are you doing here? Get out. Security. Get this man out of my office," he yelled, slamming his hand on the desk. I didn't move. I took 3 slow, measured steps, stopping directly in front of the desk. Standing right where I had stood the day, he handed me my demotion notice. I placed my leather portfolio on the corner of his desk. The loud thud was the only sound in the room, cutting through his frantic demands. "The security outside is Novatech's, Victor," I said, my voice low and completely devoid of emotion. "They're here to ensure a smooth transition, and they are taking their orders from me." He actually scoffed, a strangled, manic sound. You were running backup scripts in the sub-basement 3 months ago. Don't be ridiculous. Howard, this isn't one of your pathetic revenge fantasies. You're trespassing. I'm going to have you arrested. I opened the portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper, my official Novatech Executive ID badge. I flipped it across the desk so he could see the photo, the title, Howard Jenkins, Executive Vice President of Strategic Integration. He picked it up, his hand shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. He read the title, then my name, then the official corporate seal. The smugness that defined his entire personality for the past year disintegrated. His face went slack, a terrible mass of dawning realization. The man who had boasted about ruining my life, who had so casually demoted me, was now staring at his own execution warrant. "No," he whispered, the word barely audible. "This is impossible. You can't be. You're a programmer." I was a programmer you demoted and humiliated. I corrected him. That demotion gave me 7 hours of uninterrupted time every night to study Stellar Tech's operational weaknesses. Your arrogance, Victor, was a massive security vulnerability. You neglected the infrastructure, you suppressed the reports, and you spent $40 million on a failed system to stroke your own ego. I used all of that. I presented it to Novatech's CEO. I gave them the blueprint for this takeover. I was the one they trusted to ensure the total disintegration of your executive team. I pulled out the executive transition plan, the beautiful, dark blue document. I slid it over the desk until it rested inches from his hand. "Novatech appreciates your years of service, Victor," I continued, using the sickeningly polite corporate jargon he used to wield. "And in recognition of that, we are offering you a one-time severance package and a lateral career transition. You have 2 options. You can sign the top form, which is your immediate resignation from the C-suite, and accept the new role we have created for you." He pointed a frantic finger at the document. "And what role is that?" "I'm a CTO. I run organizations. I'm not signing a severance package for anything less than senior VP role." I paused, leaning slightly over the desk, dropping my voice to the same intimate, cruel whisper he had used a year ago. "The new role, Victor," I said, emphasizing every word, "is Senior Data Archival Specialist, Legacy Systems. It's an insulated, non-executive position, a night shift job, actually down in the sub-basement. You'll be monitoring backup scripts and babysitting the servers you nearly crashed. It's effective immediately. I want your answer now." The silence that followed was immense, heavy with all the unsaid history between us. He realized, with sickening finality, that I hadn't just gotten a better job. I had designed his new job. I had taken his casual act of malicious demotion and weaponized it, using his company's destruction as a vehicle. He looked from the document to me, his eyes pleading, desperate. "Howard, please. We can talk about this. I'll give you back your old job. I'll make you my co-CTO. Sarah, we were just a fling, a mistake. I can talk to her. We can fix this. Don't do this to me." The desperation in his voice gave me no satisfaction, only a cold, absolute sense of justice. "Sarah's my ex-wife, Victor," I stated flatly. "And what you did was a choice, not a mistake. You broke the code of honor and professional respect, and now you're seeing the consequence of that bug. You have 5 seconds to accept the offer, or you are escorted out with nothing but a box of your personal effects." Victor's hand trembled as it reached out, not for a pen, but to clutch the mahogany edge of the desk. He knew he was beaten. He knew the Novatech legal team was a force he couldn't fight. He had underestimated the programmer, and now the programmer had debugged his entire life. Victor slowly reached for the expensive pen on his desk, his eyes never leaving mine. It wasn't the look of a defeated opponent. It was a horrified stare of a man watching his life's work and his professional identity being systematically obliterated. He picked up the pen, but his hand hovered over the resignation line, trembling violently. "You're doing this because of Sarah," he finally managed, his voice a dry rasp. He was still trying to simplify it, reduce it to a petty personal squabble instead of a massive, calculated corporate maneuver. "You're throwing away a chance at peace just for revenge." I didn't let him hide behind that convenient lie. "I'm doing this because you're a professional liability, Victor. You're arrogant, you're wasteful, and you're a terrible executive. The affair was just a data point that showed me your total lack of honor, which translated directly into your mismanagement of this company. I saw the weakness you exposed, and I sold it to the highest bidder." I tapped the line detailing his new role. "You have 60 seconds. Sign the resignation and accept the new role, Senior Data Archival Specialist. You keep your full severance package. Or refuse, and you are terminated without cause, effective immediately, leaving you with nothing but a very difficult conversation with the headhunters about why Novatech fired their newest acquisition CTO on day one." The cruelty of the choice was perfect. He could walk away with his millions, but only if he accepted the humiliation of the night shift job he'd invented for me. He had to symbolically endure the very punishment he had inflicted. He looked down at the signature line, a vein throbbing visibly in his temple. Finally, with a sound somewhere between a cough and a sob, he gripped the pen and scrawled his name, a quick, shaky scribble, on the resignation line. It was done. The legal and professional tether holding him to his corner office was severed. I didn't react. I simply picked up the signed document and placed it back into my portfolio. I then pulled out the second, thinner paper, the official job offer for Senior Data Archival Specialist. "Congratulations, Victor," I said, handing him the second document. "Your new role reports directly to me, the EVP of Strategic Integration. Your first shift begins tonight at 10 p.m. You'll be in the sub-basement near server rack 4B. I suggest you familiarize yourself with the legacy backup scripts. They're rather tedious." I watched as he read the new job title, his eyes wide, the reality of it finally crushing him. He was a CTO 1 minute, a night shift technician the next. The view, the power, the respect, all gone. He looked up at me, not with rage anymore, but with a vacant, chilling comprehension. "This was all you," he murmured. "The whole thing. The acquisition. You did this to me. You did this to yourself, Victor." I countered, standing to signal the end of the conversation. I just found the perfect opportunity to close the loop. I checked my watch. "You have 10 minutes to clear your personal belongings. Novatech Security will escort you out of the building promptly at 9:30 a.m. I didn't wait for his reaction. I turned and walked toward the door. Just before I opened it, he spoke one last time, his voice hollow. "Sarah and she won't be happy about this." She liked the life I gave her. I stopped, hand on the brass knob. That was his final, pathetic attempt to reach me, to throw my ex-wife's name into the equation one last time. I turned my head just slightly, enough to make sure he saw the complete absence of care in my eyes. "Sarah is no longer your concern, Victor," I said. "She lost the life we built because she chose to chase the temporary thrill you offered. And you lost everything because you thought you were entitled to take my life away. There are consequences for that kind of hubris. Enjoy the quiet of the sub-basement." I didn't wait for a reply. I opened the door, nodded to the Novatech security guard standing outside, and walked out, closing the heavy walnut door behind me. I had walked into that office as his new superior, and I had left as the orchestrator of his total defeat. The hallway felt different now. Lighter. The executive wing no longer felt intimidating. It felt like ground I had conquered. My first act as the EVP of Strategic Integration was complete. I walked toward the Novatech team in the boardroom, the signed document secure in my portfolio. I had completed my primary objective. Victor Vance was professionally ruined and forced into a role of utter insignificance. It wasn't just revenge. It was an act of personal reclamation. I had taken back my dignity, my career trajectory, and the sense of control that he had stolen from me. Later that afternoon, I sat in what was once Victor's corner office, looking out at the city skyline. The heavy mahogany desk was now mine. I had the view, the power, and the job I had earned the hard way. I picked up the old brass plaque that still read Victor Vance, Chief Technology Officer, and tossed it into the wastebasket. The feeling was intense, but it wasn't the furious, boiling triumph I expected. It was profound, quiet relief. The toxic chapter was closed. The vengeance was delivered. Now, all that was left was a work, building a real, legitimate future, one based on merit and not on spite. The story was over, but the lesson lingered. Never mistake a programmer for a pawn. Sometimes the quiet ones are the only ones who know how to rebuild the system from the ground up, just to watch their enemies crash and burn inside it. The aftermath of that corner office confrontation was quieter than I expected, both inside the building and inside my head. The rage, the laser focus of the previous year had dissipated, replaced by a profound, almost boring sense of finality. Victor Vance was gone, escorted out of the building with nothing but a cardboard box containing his expensive trinkets and his newly signed demotion papers. The irony of him having to collect his personal effects, just as I had a year prior, was a small, satisfying, and very final detail. I spent the rest of the day in my new office, the corner office. The first thing I did was order a new desk and chair. The mahogany was too ostentatious, too much like Victor. I wanted something clean, modern, and practical. The second thing I did was call the facilities team to take down the massive, abstract, and utterly tasteless modern art that Victor had adored. I replaced it with a simple whiteboard for strategic planning. The office needed to reflect merit, not ego. The transition period was brutal, but necessary. As the EVP of Strategic Integration, my job now was to essentially clean up Victor's mess. I had to merge Stellar Tech's assets with Novatech's infrastructure, which meant decommissioning all the failed, expensive projects Victor had championed, including the $40 million cloud migration system. It was tedious, hard work, but every successful server migration, every streamlined process, was another layer of paint over the wreckage of my old life. I gave Victor a few days to settle into his new, low-level role before I checked in. I didn't want to gloat, but I needed to close the professional loop to ensure he was following my directive. I walked down to the sub-basement at 11 p.m. on a Thursday night. The atmosphere was exactly as I remembered it. Cold, humming with servers, and dead silent. I found him at the temporary workstation near server rack 4B. He was wearing an ill-fitting polo shirt and a pair of old jeans. He was staring blankly at a terminal running the exact same backup script that I had monitored for months. The man who once commanded boardrooms was now babysitting bites. He looked up when he heard my footsteps. His eyes were tired and completely defeated. There was no arrogance left, just a hollow emptiness. "Howard," he acknowledged, his voice flat. "Victor, how is the archival going?" I asked, my voice calm and professional. He shrugged, returning his gaze to the blinking cursor. It's archives. It's exactly as you described it. Tedious. I leaned against the server rack. It requires attention to detail, Victor. Something you always told me was beneath a visionary like yourself. Now it's your full-time job. I'm sure you'll find a quiet time conducive to your inner reflection. He didn't take the bait. He just sighed. You won, Howard. You took my job, my reputation, and my view. Are you happy now? That was a lingering question, the final piece of the puzzle. Was I happy? I looked at the defeated man in front of me, the one who had so gleefully destroyed my marriage and my career, and I realized a strange, final truth. Revenge doesn't bring happiness. It only brings closure. Happiness is irrelevant, Victor. I explained, choosing my words carefully. I sought justice. I sought to prove that character matters more than charisma. You thought my quiet competence was a weakness. It was my strength. You mocked me for loving code more than corporate games, but it was the code, the logic, the data, the precise analysis of your failure. That brought you down. I gave him his final, professional marching orders. I'm not here to gloat. I'm here to ensure you're fulfilling your duties as outlined in your contract. Do the job, keep your head down, and you keep your severance. Become a problem, and I will personally see that your employment is terminated without cause, effective retroactively. I looked at the server rack, the one that used to represent my prison. And Victor, I need you to understand one thing. When you were having your affair, you thought you were living this grand, passionate life. But you were just another predictable cliché. The man you called the programmer spent his time building a future that didn't depend on a woman or a boss, but on raw skill. You taught me the ultimate lesson. Never let anyone else define your worth. I pushed off the server rack. I expect a full report on the legacy system by Monday morning. I'll see myself out. I left him there, bathed in the cool blue glow of the server lights, a millionaire in the lowest job in the company. He had been given a new, clear-cut routine, the quiet stability he had once despised. He would sit in that basement, smelling the ozone and thinking about every single moment that led to his downfall. I walked out of the building and into the cool night air. The city skyline was blazing with lights, and somewhere up there, my new corner office waited. I had the power, the money, and the dignity I'd earned. I never looked back at Stellar Tech. I never contacted Sarah again. That part of my life was a closed database, wiped clean. I had traded a messy, emotional past for a vast, clear, powerful future. The programmer had successfully rewritten his own story. The final word? It's for you, the one still listening to the story. We all face people who try to dismiss us, to diminish us, or define us by their own narrow, selfish perspective. Don't fight them with their rules. Don't get lost in the noise. Get quiet, get smart, and build the power that makes their entire world reliant on your skill. That's the real victory.